Hey gang, and welcome back to another installment of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Maxwell, and today we're going to be targeting your biceps femoris. This is the outer lateral hamstring. Now traditionally the hamstring is used to bend the knee and extend the hip behind you. Now functionally it stabilizes the lower portion of your leg, your tibia, as you step forward so that it doesn't internally rotate. Now oftentimes a great percentage of our population, or a good percentage of the population, has a muscular distortion syndrome called excess pronation syndrome. And that's characterized by having the foot flatten out excessively and have the foot rotate out to try to balance the leg. Now the problem with that is that the biceps femoris becomes overactive as it attempts to stabilize the tibia from rotating inward, due to which it's going to actively inhibit your glute and make your hamstring your primary hip extender. We don't want that. So today we're going to show you how to use a lacrosse ball to use self-myofascial release to release the tension in the bicep femoris, lengthen it so that we turn down the tone, increase the muscles of the lower leg that internally rotate or invert the foot, strengthen the muscles that help stabilize the femur and the gluteus medius, and then integrate it into a balanced position so that we upregulate this into our central nervous system. A lot to get into, so let's get right into it. If you have questions, you can always reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. Remember, you're designed to move, so let's get moving. So this is a self-myofascial release of the biceps femoris using a lacrosse ball. First, grab a bench and then we're going to sit down on it. Oftentimes you'll see people trying to roll out their hamstrings on the ground with a foam roller. Unfortunately, that's not going to be as an acute of an angle necessary to actually pin the bicep or the lateral hamstring down between the surface and your femur. So you're going to need a smaller ball. In this case, I'm going to use a lacrosse ball. From there, you're going to pin the ball down underneath your leg on the outer lateral portion of that hamstring. If you use your fingertips, you can actually identify the tendon if you feel it right underneath the kneecap. And then right where the tendon meets up with the muscle itself, go ahead and pin that ball down between the bench and the leg. You're going to basically push the hamstring down into the femur, apply pressure there, and then hold it from there. We're going to start our fascial release from that point. Let's get started. You want to position the ball so that the trigger point or tender spot is anchored between the ball and the pelvis. As the tension subsides, start to straighten out your knee in small rhythmic motions. This will draw the muscle through the adhesion. Your body attempts to stabilize your shin from rotating in by engaging this bicep femoris muscle. Releasing the tension in the muscle will help to create a new firing pattern in your glutes or butt, which should increase the stability of your femur and by extension the ankle. This application is meant to be felt. If you recognize that you're unable to get the muscle to release in the 60 seconds that we've allotted, feel free to pause the video and then continue. When you're ready, jump back in. Okay, let's move on. This is a PNF stretch of the bicep femoris using just body weight. So using the same bench that we just rolled on, we're going to step parallel to it, bringing the leg up perpendicular to the bench. Our goal here is not to let the pelvis sway out. The tension from the hamstring oftentimes will turn or dissociate the joint. We don't want that to happen. So with the leg extended, you're going to bring your toes upward towards the shin and then internally rotate. That's going to line up the bicep femoris for an active stretch. From there, we're going to draw our shoulders back and tip forward through the hips, making note not to, again, bow or flex over the spine. From there, it will initiate the PNF stretch. Let's go ahead and get started. Breathe out as you tip. It's tempting to want to overly stretch these muscles or lengthen them to the point of pain. Remember that each muscle has a natural stretch and recoil cycle. So if too much pressure is applied, the muscle will want to recoil back reflexively to its original position. You'll want to gradually apply pressure by keeping the knee extended with the leg drawn into the midline of the body with the toe internally rotated towards the center. This will isolate the biceps femoris. Try to keep your lower back stable the whole time. Breathing out will also help to release tension as well. Once a release is felt from the static stretch, you'll utilize a technique called neuromuscular stretching by flexing the muscle at 25% of your capacity for 7 seconds, then release the tension and begin to lengthen the muscle again for 20 seconds. You should see an increase in length. Complete this process a few times, then move forward. All right, let's finish up. This is an activation of the posterior tibialis using an exercise band and bench. So now that we've reduced the tension in the hamstring, which again is helping to stabilize the tibia, we want to encourage the muscles that help to brace the foot to upregulate or get stronger. In this case, it's going to be the posterior tibialis. It's the muscle that's necessary to internally rotate the foot and helps with dorsiflexion of the ankle. So when we step forward, it actually creates the right tracking of motion as we hit the heel strike as we walk. So what we're going to need is a bench and an exercise band that's going to be anchored at the bottom end of the bench. You can do this by anchoring it to maybe, let's say, a couch cushion with another chair. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bench. Either way, I'm going to lasso the band so that there's a little slip knot at the bottom so that I can slide over my foot nicely. So with the band slipped over the toe box of the foot, I'm going to start by making sure that there's sufficient tension in the beginning. I'm going to make sure that my femur doesn't move and I'm anchoring or pushing my weight into my heel and using that as a pivot point. From there, I'm drawing my toes up or dorsiflexing the foot towards my shin, and then I'm going to internally rotate the foot into the center of the body without moving through the leg. That sets us into our position. Let's go ahead and get started. As you rotate your foot to the center, try not to assist with the internal rotation of the upper leg. Keep the motion centered at the ankle and keep your toes pulled upwards towards the shin the entire time. This exercise isolates your posterior tibialis. This muscle is key for the stabilization of the foot and the maintaining of the medial arch of the foot. If these muscles are weak, this leads to a falling in of the arch and a flattening of the foot as we walk. This is also called pronation or eversion. This will create inward pressure on the shin bone, leading to a collapsing in at the knee. As a compensation, the body will attempt to control the inward rotation through the recruitment of muscles like the biceps femoris. As the bicep femoris attaches to the pelvis, this can impact the stability of your hips and back as well. That's why it's important to strengthen the posterior tibialis to stop this chain of events. This is an integrated movement isolating the glute medius using just body weight. So now that we've strengthened the muscles that turn the foot internally or invert the foot, we want to make sure that we start to create more suspension up at the hip by activating the glute medius that controls the internal rotation of the femur. So what we're going to do is get into a side lying position. This time we're going to be on the right side down, bracing our head in our palm and pulling our head back into our fingertips to center our head. Your nose should be in line with your sternum. From there, you're bending at the hip and at the knee, rotating your knee internally towards the floor, and then you're going to push down into hip extension through the heel and then subtly rotate the femur or the upper leg with the kneecap up at a diagonal towards the ceiling without pivoting through the hip. From there, you're going to drop it back down, and that sets us up into our position to isolate the glute medius. Let's get started. As you lift your leg up, think about rotating from your femur and not from your lower leg or foot. The kneecap should rotate upwards first and then internally without additional movement being seen in the pelvis. Try to keep your core engaged by maintaining the contraction of your obliques and abdominals. This is called a hollow body. The spine will be slightly flexed or concaved inwards. This movement seeks to integrate and isolate the lateral rotators of the femur or your upper leg bone, especially the glute medius. This muscle attaches the pelvis on the backside of the body to the femur. Folks with fallen arches or whose feet rotate outwards have a tendency to have weakened lateral hip rotator muscles. That's why it's important that we identify and strengthen them. Okay, let's put it all together. This is a single leg balance using multiplanar hip extension, isolating the deep longitudinal sling using just body weight. So now that we've turned on the posterior tibialis, activated our glute medius to create more stability in the femur, we want to integrate this into a strength position that targets the entire leg and challenges our balance. So we're going to step onto our left side, letting our right leg float, put our weight back into the heel with our arms on our hips. Our goal is to sit down into a single leg balance until we feel our threshold for balance challenged, meaning that there would be a distortion at the ankle, knee, or hip. From there, I'm going to extend my right floating leg out in front of me sagittally, out to the side at a diagonal laterally, over to the side again laterally, and then behind me into a transverse plane, then starting from the beginning. Let's go ahead and get started. This balanced strength position puts all the pieces together for us. Keep your weight centered behind you by putting your weight into your heel. This will help you to engage your backside musculature. Keep your gaze fixed straight ahead and keep your head in line with your trunk or rib cage. Only extend your floating leg so far that you don't move the ankle or knee from the fixed position on your braced leg. By challenging your body's threshold for balance after releasing and integrating the right inputs from our prior segments, this will help your nervous system to create a more efficient firing pattern. That way the right muscles will fire at the right time, allowing you to stabilize the foot and absorb the energy from the ground appropriately. Okay, let's hit the other side. This is a self-myofascial release of the biceps femoris using a lacrosse ball. So on a bench, once again, we're gonna brace our leg on top of a lacrosse ball. Now to find the biceps femoris, it's pretty easy. Rotate your toe out, push your heel into the ground, and then pull your heel back into your butt. When you do that, you'll feel the tendon flare. You're gonna wanna go just above the tendon, closer to the hip, and then find the first trigger point that you find. From there, you're gonna push your weight down into the ball, basically compressing the biceps femoris between the ball and the femur. From there, rotate the toe internally, and we'll begin our fascial release. Let's get started. Often folks attempt to roll their hamstrings with a foam roller on the ground. This places the bicep femoris or lateral hamstring in a tightened position, as you must straighten the knee in order to get into the position. If you use a bench or platform, as shown here, you'll be able to keep the bicep femoris in a relaxed position and use the weight of the leg to place pressure on the muscle. Using a smaller surface area with a lacrosse ball will also help to isolate the fascial tissue more effectively. Releasing the tension in the bicep femoris will help to unravel the compensation pattern that destabilizes the knee and ankle. Stay with this until a release is felt. Okay, let's finish up. This is the PNF stretch of the biceps femoris using just body weight. So the bicep or the hamstrings in general aren't necessarily tight or shortened, but they are overused, and because of which the tone in that muscle will turn off other muscle groups that we want to actually integrate, like the glute. So we're going to try to encourage it to release now that we've turned it off with the myofascial release using the lacrosse ball. So with the bench parallel to our hips, we're gonna stick our leg up with the hip flexed, with the toe dorsiflexed towards the shin, and then subtly rotate it internally. From there, you'll start to feel that tension wrap around into your calf and then down underneath your gluteal fold or your butt. From there, you're gonna arch your back, extend through the hips, or extend through the arms rather, the back, and then slowly tip forward. And then as we get through this, we'll show you how to use the PNF protocol. Let's go ahead and get started. This includes an example of what's called neuromuscular stretching. This type of stretching involves taking your muscle to its in-cap range of motion or stretching it to the point where the joint wants to start to move. Then you would actively contract the muscle to be stretched for 7 seconds. Once you're done, you'll passively move the joint to the new range of motion and hold the position for 20 seconds. You can repeat this several times to see if you can increase the range of motion in that joint. Utilizing this type of stretch helps to turn off the activity in the muscle, allowing you to achieve greater ranges of motion as well as creating an inhibitory effect so that other muscles can be used to facilitate the movement profile trying to be achieved. In this case, reduction in the biceps femoris trying to eccentrically decelerate the medial rotation of the tibia or shin bone. This will allow the muscles of the ankle to get stronger. Let's move on. This is an activation of the posterior tibialis on the right side using an exercise tube or band and a bench. So now that we've turned the tone down in that hamstring, remember that muscle is responsible for helping to keep the tibia or the shin bone from internally rotating and then creating a flattening out of the foot. Well, now that that's been reduced, we want to actually increase the strength of the muscles that are responsible for rotating the foot internally or inverting it to create a greater base of support at the ankle. So using an exercise band, I'm going to tie a little slip knot at the end of it so that it slips over the roof of my foot or toe box comfortably. From there, I'm going to pull the leg out at about a diagonal so that it pulls back diagonally at about a 45-degree angle. I'm going to push the weight into my heel to anchor the foot there and keep my femur or my upper leg from moving. From there, I'm going to rotate my foot into the midline of the body, keeping the toes pointed towards the shin the entire time, and then slowly release it back to its beginning position without moving the heel. Let's go ahead and get started. Make sure to control the movement and move at a consistent tempo. 2 seconds inward and 2 seconds outward. As the posterior tibialis serves to decelerate the inward rotation of the foot, we'll want to focus on the slow, controlled outward motion as the band pulls the foot away from the midline of the body. Often individuals with weakened posterior tibialis experience plantar fasciitis or shin splints as the body tries to compensate for the lack of stability at the foot. In physics, and in particular, biomechanics, the study of human movement, ground reaction force is the force exerted by the ground on a body when it gets in contact with it. As the foot is the first contact the body has when moving, it's very important to have stable feet, supported by the posterior tibialis, so as to control ground reaction forces. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So this is an integrated strengthening movement, isolating the glute medius on the right leg using just body weight. So now that we've activated the muscle that's responsible for turning the foot in or inverting it, we also want to create an extra support or greater tension in the glute medius, the muscle responsible for rotating the femur or the upper portion of your leg externally or laterally. So we're going to go into a side lying position on our left side, once again bracing our head in our palms so that our chin is tucked. From there, the knee is going to be bent slightly and the foot is going to be dorsiflexed in and internally rotated subtly. We're going to let our hip drop down and we're going to push through the hip into hip extension and then rotate the kneecap up towards the ceiling and then trace the same line back to our beginning position. Let's go ahead and get started. A common compensation people make when completing this movement is to rely on their TFL or lateral hip flexor muscles, the muscles that draw the leg into the chest and away from the body. To avoid this, imagine that you're pushing your foot down and away from the body as you rotate your leg upwards, almost as if you're taking a step. This will help your nervous system to recruit the entire gluteal complex and reduce the tone or firing pattern to the TFL. Not only will this strengthen the glute medius to help stabilize the knee and ankle, but it will also help to stabilize the hips and increase your core strength. Let's add all the pieces together now. This is a single leg balance with multiplanar leg extension, isolating the deep longitudinal sling system using just body weight. So now that we've upregulated the tone in our posterior tibialis and glute medius, we want to integrate it into a global movement that challenges our balance. That way it increases our central nervous system's ability to upregulate this into functional movement. So we're gonna put our weight back into our heel on our right leg and then sit down into a squat until we challenge our base of support or our threshold for balance. That means that we're not gonna see any kind of disruptions at the ankle, knee, or hip. Brace your arms on the sides of the hip, trying to keep the hips parallel to the ground, and then we're gonna extend the leg in front of us, out at a 45, right to the side laterally, and then back behind us in a transverse plane, starting over from the beginning. Let's go ahead and get started. As this Design to Move series was dedicated to the stability of the foot, as you're completing this balance challenge, try to be mindful of the position of your ankle and how it feels as you extend the floating leg through the multiple angles of hip extension. If you notice that your ankle is falling in or that your foot is starting to flatten out, try to recruit your posterior tibialis by pushing your big toe inwards and down. This will increase the arch of your foot. It may burn a little, and that's a good thing. Understanding how the body responds and adapts to a challenge is critical in developing better body awareness and correcting for compensations that develop in our movement patterns. Utilizing a balanced movement that integrates the corrective inputs will help to identify how your body is personally challenged so you can make adjustments and increase your performance over time. That wraps it up. Thanks for joining us. All right, gang, that brings us to the end of our Design to Move series on the biceps femoris. Remember, a lot of us have a tendency to have our feet rotate out and flatten, called excessive pronation syndrome. Now, while the bicep femoris doesn't contribute directly towards that, it does help in creating a distortion syndrome that will grow up into the hips and then into the lower back. That's why it's important that we reduce the tension on that bicep femoris, upregulate the strength in the posterior tibialis that controls the angle of the tibia at the foot, and then strengthen the glute medius so that our femur tracks straight when we take a step forward. So again, if you have questions on any of this, you can reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com or reach out to us on our website at fluidfitnessandnutrition.com. Remember, your body's designed to move, so stay in motion, and we'll see you next time.